Futures are really about futures championed, desired, dreamed of, fought for from below in our societies and on a planetary scale. They are futures that are not cooked up in business schools or in technocratic bureaucracies, etc. These are futures that are in the making, and in this particular project we are profiling futures in relation to climate change and temporalities. We are featuring emancipatory futures in history, coming out of struggles, revolutions, and things like that. We are profiling decolonized futures, and so rethinking, if you like, the complexion of futures. We are looking at utopia and dystopia in the context of futures. We are looking at systemic pathways into futures, like food sovereignty, which many of us are engaged in this university and beyond. Solidarity economy, climate jobs, and of course commons. But we're also interested in grand ecocentric futures. And we've been talking about Green New Deals, we've been talking about decarbonizing civilization, we've been talking about deep just transitions and the modalities and the obstacles and so on to realizing these kinds of big transformative emancipatory alternatives. In the cohort today, we have several students. Before we hand over to...
Thanks for coming. For sharing the 3 hours. It's 3 hours, that's quite a bit. But we have time to work, to go a little bit deeper into the topic than we can usually do with just giving a talk and having a short discussion. But that's a privilege. I feel privileged to be here, to be invited, hosted by Well Foundation and of its university. And I always like to start with where you are coming from in terms of the topic we are talking today about today. So I'd like to start with a question to you, rather than starting with an introduction into the topic. And this connects the commons with the notion of emancipation. So I'd like you to discuss with perhaps 3 or 2, however, in very small groups. Why is the commons important to emancipation? Is the commons important to emancipation, and why? I give you 2 minutes and then we come back to the plenary.
Going to tell us what we want.
Go ahead.
From our discussion, we realized that the commons offers an escape from the neoliberal capitalist system.
Escape from
The neoliberal capitalist system.
neoliberal capitalism.
Another important advantage is that they provide local options to development.
Mm-hmm. So I'll put your localization, right?
Yes.
Is it with S or I don't know? Doesn't matter. Okay. What else?
We come out with some term solidarity,
Mm-hmm.
and we come out the question of the people self-organizing
Mm-hmm.
and or recognizing knowledge.
What was the last one?
knowledge.
We everybody has knowledge.
Mm-hmm. It's sharing knowledge.
Yeah.
And then the last one was especially in relationship between humans
Yeah.
and nature
Okay.
and buildings
Yeah.
and space.
Human, nature, space.
Yeah. Because we've got geography.
Yeah. Human being. Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure how this responds to the question, but we'll see. Who else?
So the notion was needs. Needs was the center of that.
Needs,
Yeah.
because it's needs-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also we said, what are you escaping from? So we started with that question about emancipatory. So the escape or the change is important.
Yeah.
So you recognize that.
Okay. What else? Did you come up with a different answer?
No, we just came up with more questions.
Good.
So the fundamental question really was, we had a sense that emancipatory lifted or was given agency as soon as it was de-linked from notions of resource. But yeah, we were still battling with, what were we battling with?
We were battling with the idea of the commons. At what stage do the commons become emancipatory? Because the commons can be oppressive if they are in a different set of hands. So the question that we came up with is, at what stage do the commons become emancipatory?
Yeah, okay, I guess, I mean, perhaps the main idea of this afternoon is to answer that question. I think it's a very good one, it's a fine-tuned one. It's better than just asking, do the commons contribute to the emancipation, because if you do that, you have a certain idea of commons in mind, and this needs to be unpacked, right? So I guess that's what we will do, we'll unpack a little bit this notion. At what stage of the process of commoning can we really speak about emancipation? It's an excellent question.
I come up with a philosophical contention to say commons cannot be emancipatory because they are materials, and as Hegel put it very well, he said the substance of matter is gravity, tending to pull us down. So if focus is only on material common, there is no way you'll be emancipated, because all of us will tend to be pulled down. There is no emancipation unless we go beyond matter, and maybe we embrace spirit. Yeah, then there will be emancipation.
Okay, so here is somebody who says, no, commons can't be emancipatory, and I think the same is true, that this is linked, tied to a certain idea of commons. So again, perhaps unpacking this, we can come to a common understanding. Other ideas?
We also kind of hit on the idea of the sites of sharing knowledge, the knowledge exchange.
Yeah, sharing
Skills
knowledge and
exchange,
knowledge.
yeah.
Okay, we're just empowering people.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually now you might understand why I was trying to ask you to sit down over there so that you
Yes,
can see
I
my
do.
scribbles. That was the point. Welcome. So okay, I will keep that in mind and try to connect back to your ideas and to unpack these, as I can see, different understandings of commons in the room. And what I would like to do is to introduce you to, I would say, our voice, our opinion of what the commons is all about. And this voice in a big international choir of commons and commoners and commoning is one that would hold, that would challenge this idea. And I would say, of course, the commons contributes to emancipation. And the question is, emancipation what from? So I'm a trained linguist, so I usually like to start with etymology. And so somebody needs to take his or her hands off, right? So who is this entity? Emancipere, taking the hands off commoners, common people, or however you call them. So, and what we usually have when we think about the commons is we contrast it with other realms. That would be the state and the market, right? And now, you can think about challenging the sphere of the state or challenging the sphere of the market from a commons perspective by doing something like this, making this bigger, and thereby shrinking the space of the state and shrinking the space of the market. That's a very common way of looking at it. If you do this, what you're actually doing is kind of conceiving the commons as a third space, as if there were, so to speak, three autonomous spaces. One governed by the market, through the market, one governed through state institutions, and another governed by the people and through the people. So this is one way of looking at it. But I would like you, and it's a very common one. Yeah. So that, and then it ends up saying, okay, we can have a little bit more of commons in the world. That might be better for some people. And if you live at my edge of the world, in Germany, then they will tell you, that might be good for Africa. Or might be good for the rural region. Or perhaps it was good in medieval times, but certainly not for us, the modern industrialized, democratic liberal countries, right? So how can we challenge this? This is good for some people at some point. And really look at it from the perspective of emancipation, because there is a power relation in between. And the offer we make in the book, and I will try to guide you through a little bit, is we need to think as, so to speak, inviting the social and the economic space based on different premises, based on different ideas of what is a human being, what is reality all about, what does economy mean, what does governance mean, what does self-organization mean, etc. And as we are here in a university, so I will make it very academic in a way, and say what we're basically saying is this commons discourse contributes to the emancipation of, I would even call it epistemicide, of the wrong basic assumptions about reality and the ways of creating livelihoods and the ways of creating knowledge. And this is because whatever we do, the doing is here. Here are the methods, the way we produce knowledge, the way we produce food, the way we sell food, the way we distribute food, etc., etc. These are very concrete things we do, our methods. And the thing is that our basic assumptions about reality, what the philosophers call ontologies, is tied to our ideas of how we produce knowledge. So, onto-epistemology informs our theories about the world, informs our methodologies, and informs what we do. So, our starting point in contributing a book that contributes to the emancipation of people and of knowledge systems is here at the ontological level. Because everything else is, so to speak, an offspring of that. I could put it differently. I could simply say, if our thinking is wrong, everything else will be wrong too. Our doing will be wrong too. And perhaps one way of showing that this is going on either way, our way, but also the way of those who would challenge that idea that the commons contributes to fairness and aliveness and freedom. Like this one, this Garrett Harding, I'm sure you've heard. And if you have not heard from Garrett Harding, I'm sure you're familiar with the story he tells, because he has kind of reawakened one of the very old metaphors that is as old as the philosophical dispute in mankind, which is what belongs to everybody at the end of the day will be ruined, in this case, overgrassed, etc. So he published an essay which is very influential, one of the most quoted essays in social sciences, in '86, so more than 50 years ago. It was republished 2 years ago because it is again so influential, and there he does something very powerful. He uses a metaphor that everybody can understand. Picture a pasture open to all. And every herdsman brings his or her cattle to the pasture, his cattle certainly by the time, to the pasture, and is keen to sell the next day as much milk or meat at the market as possible. That is, to pocket in, to privatize the gains, and to socialize the losses. And he basically says, and this is the key sentence of the essay, freedom in the commons brings ruin to all. And this is kind of a sentence that sticks to people. It's repeated over and over and over again. You know, we already know that freedom in the commons brings ruin to all. There will be overgrazing, overuse, etc., etc. So therefore, the economists, and very often in political sciences too, we only look at the market and the state, and we forget about looking closely at the commons. So this has been a very powerful way of making the commons invisible. Yeah. And it's interesting how in the textbooks, it's actually, I don't know, is there anybody studying economy in here? Wasn't on, right? Yeah, economy. So in the textbooks, in the economist textbooks, you have this, there are the public goods, the private goods, the club goods, and the common goods. And it goes the same way. It goes like, okay, we have a few things there that we would label common goods, but they are not really important. What does it mean they are not really important? It can mean they don't really contribute to the GDP. And then the textbook goes on with other topics, right? So there was a woman challenging Garrett Harding because she knew better, because she has looked at what people actually do. And she, Elinor Ostrom, she got the Nobel Prize in economy in 2009. She died 3 years later. And she basically said, how is it even possible that something that is social, complex social system that provides food, shelter, water, sustainable environments, etc., fish, etc., to people. She was mostly looking at these natural resource systems. How is it even possible that they were taken out of academic studies, and that we don't have not even an idea about how self-organization works? So, the same way economists don't have an idea of what money is, they just assume it as a given. They don't theorize about self-organization. And so she brought it back into the discussion 10 years ago. But what she did not really do, she did not really shift the conversation at this level. So basically, trained in the 60s, 70s in academia, she shares basic assumptions with Garrett Harding and other scientists. And one of these basic assumptions is that there is such a thing as the commons. So this is now a philosophical point. If I ask you what is the commons, a philosopher would probably challenge me and say, you know what, that's the wrong question. Because if you ask the question that way, what are you doing? What are you assuming? If you ask somebody what is X, Y, Z, what are you assuming? That there is an existence. That there is whatever existence, a thing, a something, right? And this points you to the very fact that we have unlearned, and actually it's part of the Enlightenment story as well, but that's another discussion. So it's part of the Enlightenment story to have unlearned to seeing relationality as the decisive reality. So you cannot think about the commons as a thing that, I don't know, exists out there as if it was independent from us. And so it's about seeing them and then caring for them. No. To put it bluntly, there's no such thing as a commons. But we can turn almost everything into a commons. So it is a way of becoming. You see the difference? So if you put it that way, you begin to ask different questions. Like so, the basic thing would be, so how do we do this? So how do we do this? And these are questions that were not always raised in the scholarly, the academic discussion of the commons, not even in the Illinois School. But I'm happy I left this in because I wanted to take the next two slides out because I have already shown them 3 times. But I'm happy I left them in because we have a mapping expert here. So you remember that I said if you change your basic assumptions, you change everything. Your theories about the commons, the way you create knowledge, the way you ask questions, and then the way you shape the world. And if I talk about learning to see rationality as the decisive reality, I mean relationality externally and internally. Because there's always, whatever you look at, you have always an external and an internal side. So what does it mean that we also need to look at the commons? I sometimes say, if they don't feel okay, if they don't feel right, they are not good enough. So it has always also something to do with us and our inner lives. And I will show you an example of this. This is a map of the Great Sandy Desert. It's our standard way of seeing the Great Sandy Desert in Australia, right? And I'm very used to look at this map and to make sense of it. I see a map, I see letters, I see shades of hills and a lot of information on months and climate, etc. And I can read it. I have access to this kind of information. And this, interestingly, it's such a pity. The thing is way more beautiful because the colors here are really weird. Look at this. So, anyway, it's the same map, right? It's the same map, and I would look at it and not even recognize it as a map. I would probably say it's an artwork, it's a piece of art, and actually it is. And what is absolutely unthinkable for me is, how can I walk this map? How can I find the place where I need to go? Because I'm not used to read and to understand and to decipher the stories weaved into this map, the inner worlds of Aboriginal people weaved into this map, etc., etc. And I think if this seems to be a weird example, just think about people today, the young generations, unlearn reading normal maps because they're trained to look at a blue dotted line. It is a process of unlearning. Like, to get rid of that idea of relationality means also to do away with relationality as a fundamental, basic issue of even talking about the commons, let alone creating them. Also means that we unlearn all the techniques and the methods we need to enact them. So this is when we, David Bollier and I, my dear fellow commoner David Bollier, at the hospital actually, currently, when we had, after 1.5 years of really hard work trying to write this book, had to start anew, had to leave all the effort aside and rethink it and start from the ontological level. And that's what we did, without being philosophers. So for those who are not familiar with these philosophical concepts, I'll give you a quick metaphor about what ontologies do. So they are like the window through which you look at the world. And it's pretty easy to understand that if you look, at least for me it's a powerful metaphor, because I can get that idea easily, that I look through this window and again and again and again, and somebody tells me that there is Johannesburg out there. And I say, oh, Johannesburg, that's a beautiful green place, right? So the window defines at the end of the day what I take for reality. And our invitation therefore is, rather than looking through that window, to look at that window. Or to put it that way, rather than looking only through that window, open other windows. Or make the window at least as wide open as possible. We will probably never get a full sense of what reality actually is, but we can shift the windows, make them bigger, look through different windows at the same time, etc., to get as close as we can to reality. So this is what we call an onto shift. So if you want to talk about the commons in such a way that they help us emancipate from the power of the state and the power of the market, we need to stop conceiving them as just a third sphere and understanding them as the possibility to create and enact another kind of reality, and to read the realities we are in from another perspective. And this is very powerful precisely because if you start from here, your theory of the commons will be different than that of Gerrit Hardin's, and even than that of Elinor Ostrom's. And the methodologies you use to describe what commoning is will also be different. But I will come back to this later. And again, I use a metaphor. It's like, we are here, we know about farming here. You try to do this. You try to convert this university into an edible university, as far as I understood, right? So the quality of the seed will be extremely important for this project to succeed. So, and this has to do with our idea of transformation and of change. So this quality of the seed, the onto seed as we call it, will directly impact your garden out there. It will have an impact at a macro scale, at a micro level, the quality of your garden. But will also connect to other interventions like, I don't know, water management, energy management, waste management, etc. So it will transcend the micro level to the meso level, and it will transcend the meso level to the macro level. What I'm doing here kind of very quickly is doing away with a layered, hierarchical, vertical idea of society. Societies are complex, adaptive social systems. So they don't work that way. And I'm convinced, if I would not be convinced, I wouldn't stand it, working on the commons and feeling powerless, because sometimes you can get the idea that working on the commons doesn't make sense because you don't have the power they have to change the world, right? You don't even have the power of the coronavirus to make things going the other way. So, but I'm convinced of this idea that if you plant a different seed, it transcends every level. So it is, in other words, it's not for me, it's not a question of scale. Okay, so I guess I will skip. Oh, I have no energy. What is that? I'll figure it. Let's check this. Is this connected?
No, it's the plug is the problem.
What is the problem?
The plug.
This.
You need.
I need a different plug?
No, try to push
That was the camera.
under.
It's probably
Camera's
loose.
Yours is working, right?
I think you just took it out. Well,
No, this
it
is
was
mine.
working.
I think maybe just go to
Is there load shedding?
No, the camera was working. Thanks, John.
I mean, I have still 23 minutes to go. Perhaps I should close in 23 minutes, but I will be halfway through. So I'm not sure how we. Does it work? Yeah. Yeah. Done. Okay. Okay so far. Oh, any questions? It'll still take us perhaps half an hour. Okay, there we go. Can engage in a discussion. So, what this did then in our journey through the commons, and after writing a few anthologies, compiling a few anthologies on the issue, and David and I then realizing that we need, in a way, start from scratch with our own thinking and putting all that we've understood during the last 15 years on the topic, to put it together on this relational, processual, ontological basis. Then, as you can imagine, we realized that certain categories and words and terms we use don't work, because they don't express what we have seen in the comments. Or, to go back to Garrett Hardin, and Garrett Hardin says that each herdsman brings his cattle to the meadow, and then they will bring the meat and the milk to the market. One of his basic assumptions in doing so is that, oh yeah, there is an isolated individual I, not connected to the neighbor herdsman, not connected to the community, not worrying about this graceland and therefore about the fodder of the next day. So what Garrett Hardin is assuming there is, or enshrining in that idea of freedom in the commons brings ruin to all, is a certain understanding of the human being. Now, I would not say that there's no such thing as a homo economicus in us, or that person that wants to bring a lot of milk and meat to the market and pocket in as much money as possible. I wouldn't say that. Yes, it certainly is. The question is, or the point is, we are also interdependent eyes, we are nested eyes, as we call them in the book. And whatever we do, if it's designing institutions, building houses, creating spaces, built environments, making social policies, economic policies, I don't know, feeding people, etc. Whatever we do very much depends on what is your idea of the human being and what part of this human being do you nurture in us. So do you nurture that homo economicus? So is your reward system based on nurturing this homo economicus in us? Or is your governance system or reward system or what have you there to strengthen the relationships we are in anyway? Right? So also there, it's not an either or thing. It's like, what are we designing for? If we want to design for emancipation, freeness, fairness, and enlightenment. So the nested eye is just one of these terms we came up with. There are other like hierarchy and care wealth, and I would love to talk to you, to talk a bit about in the second part of the seminar about relationalized property. No, actually we call it relational ways of having. Because we got stuck in that idea that if you think about, again, we take back our three realms. If you think about the commons this way, you would put the collective property in here, the public property in here, and the private property in here, isn't that right? And we got stuck in this because then we realized that there is no fundamental difference between collective property and private property, individual private property. The difference is not fundamental, it's gradual. And gradual, in what sense? That in individual private property you have one person excluding all the others, to put it bluntly, And it's collective private property. In collective property, you have a group of people excluding the others. So it's not another way of having. It's just another property regime. So we had a tough time going through that idea of how to rethink property from a relational perspective. Okay. So how do we now understand commenting from this perspective? Again, you remember that onto epistemology, theory, methodology, methods. So it was key for us to find a method that is up to the task, so to speak. That is able to take this idea of relationality into account. And the person who inspired us, and if there was somebody, I guess somebody in the room, what was it, urban design, was a designer? Or, I don't know, is perhaps familiar with Christopher Alexander. Because Christopher Alexander has been very, very influential. Even so, he is a mathematician, and then he made his career as an architect, doing projects all over the world, and ended up, for me, as being a very influential philosopher. The huge impact he had was in software design. So, the shift to object-oriented programming was inspired by Christopher Alexander. So what is a pattern? This pattern approach, the way we use the word pattern in the book is very specific. It's very Christopher Alexander style. So what does it mean? Christopher Alexander found out, and again, whatever you do, being it programming, building houses, or whatever, if you have similar contexts, like I want to build a house for people, I want to build a house in an urban environment, etc., you will have similar problems. Like, I need to start with a foundation, or people will need a roof, or people will need to get light into the house, or light out to the house, but there's a light problem, or the ventilation, you know? So you have 1 million ways to build houses, but you always face the same type of problems. So I said, isn't that interesting? And looking at 1 million types of houses and understanding what works, he then said that the good solutions to solve these problems can also be 1 million. There can also be 1 million good solutions. But the good solutions share an essence. So they share something. There is something within good solutions to the same type of problem that we can kind of coin. We can pin it down. We can understand it. And once we understand this core essence of good solutions to problems that occur over and over and over again, we have a pattern. And then we can use this pattern that guides our problem solutions. I used the, in Cape Town, I used the example. I mean, you can have a book of recipes for cooking, right? Because everybody wants a balanced and quality diet somehow. So now you can go to the bookshop and buy a book so that those who know will tell you. And then you go to another bookshop and buy another book, and those who know will tell you 20 different recipes. And you go to another bookshop and buy another book, and or you look in the internet and you get 20 different recipes, right? Recipes, recipes. recipes. And you could do something very simple. You could say, if you want a balanced diet, you need to have 7 colors on the plate. How do I do this? According to my context. And you come up with a balanced diet, which is different on your plate, different on your plate, different on your plate, different on your plate, and adapted to the context you are in. This is a pattern. You know, a pattern is not a recipe. And it's not like we found the golden rule, you only need to copy it and then it will work. There is no such thing as a prescription, as a solution we can suggest to people to make a good comments because we know. There's no such thing. So again, commenting is a process. that needs to be adapted to the context, and the patterns of commenting we came up with in the book can give you an orientation without prescribing what you ought to do because you are the experts of your environment and no other, I don't know, author, scholar, or policymaker. So, let me, before I give you a few examples, I'd just like to introduce what we call the triad of commenting. What Elinor Ostrom did is looking at, I already told you, this term self-organization. So she looked at very different, from water management in Los Angeles to fishery and to small-scale fishery in the coastal areas, from Chile to land management in Japan. And it is, again, it was not only small scale, but it was mostly focused on some type of natural resources. And then we said, but if the commons is meant to be emancipatory, not only from the state and the government, but also from the market, so then we also need to look at the provisioning part of it. So does it provide food? Does it provide shelter? Does it solve our transportation problems? Does it solve our communication problems? Can we think about ICT commons style, Wi-Fi connection community-based, etc., etc., etc. Healthcare, which is different and a little bit more independent from the available health budget of nation state, etc., etc. And this is what we call the triad of common. Alright, so you have that inner part of it. How do we relate to each other? How do we manage our social relationships? So what kind of culture do we create? While governing a commons and producing stuff we need. Because yeah, it's true, in the economic sphere, which is the economic sphere, the provisioning is the economic realm, it is a needs-based approach. So in the commons economy, there's, actually we will see it, there are a whole lot of economic concepts who disappear, and one of these concepts is profit, or even the need for profit making in order to compete in the global market, or the idea of growth for the sake of growth in order to compete in the global market. So sometimes I think that it's more interesting to look at what's not being discussed in the commons because it's not important than to look at what's being discussed. Okay, so this is our triad, and we created, let's skip that, 28 patterns. If you close your eyes and you think about a common or a collective effort you are part of, like something, or something you want to convert into a commons, whatever, and you can ask yourself that question: how do we deal with knowledge internally? How do I deal with my academic work? Do I share knowledge generously? Or do I put the copyright on my writings and then give it to the publisher? Do we share the risks of provisioning? Do we trust situated knowing? Or do we have a certain tendency to look at a more academic way of knowing? Do we reflect regularly on our peer governance? Do we find a way and a method to keep commons and commerce distinct? Do we assure consent of all those concerned by our decisions? Do we assure consent in decision making, etc., etc.? You can open your eyes. What you can do with this is you can, these are a few patterns, you can use it as a tool of reflection. You can also use it as a tool of evaluation of projects you're looking at. But now let us go into a few examples and perhaps look more closely at the provisioning part, at the economic part, and at the property part.
So just stop
Yeah.
you and help me understand something. So you mentioned
the patterning and going to the core of a good solution.
Yeah.
And maybe I wasn't attentive enough. I didn't understand how you lead from that to the pattern. So maybe if you could just help.
Yeah. So how did we come up with this basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did explain it. So, but it's very simple. We did it Ostrom style. So what Alina Ostrom did in coming up with, she has her 8 so-called design principles for long-lasting commons institutions, part of her Nobel Prize lecture. So this is what she basically got the prize for, right? And she came up with this by looking for these good rules that we could use and then suggest to other people. And she realized that these good rules don't exist. You cannot copy and paste. There's no such thing as a panacea. So what she did, she was looking at a lot of PhD students of hers and master degree people, blah, 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 looking at 800 to 1,000 case studies throughout the world and comparing them. So we basically did the same, not 800 or 1,000, and we haven't paid for this work, but we were just looking at successful examples of commoning. What do I mean by successful? It had to have a certain dimension, because what we wanted to show that this is not only small scale, it's not about scale, and it had to have a certain permanency, right? So in the case of the digital commons, this was a bit difficult because they are 15 years old. They haven't been there before, right? But in the community-supported agricultures or in the Silke Helfrich case, for instance, or the one I will introduce later on to you, they are 50 years old, which speaks to a good way of governing existing conflicts, of dealing with existing conflicts. So one of our patterns, for instance, when looking at these examples and looking at how do they deal with conflicts, realize that they keep relationships in addressing conflicts. So this is one of our patterns, keep relationships in addressing conflicts. So to come back to this kind of our orientation here. So we started with relationality and process as the ontological basis, right? We said, okay, then our knowledge creation, the methods we use for knowledge creation need to respond to that. We came up with a theory that commons is not only about governance, it's also about our social lives, it's about provisioning, and I would say it's also about self-transformation, and it's about changing the law. Not changing, not doing an amendment here and there, but changing the way, the basis, the way the law is done, basically. So we came up with a triad, but it might be 5 spheres rather than 3. And the pattern is here, the methodology. You know? This is the methodology we use to come up with a pattern, to give you an idea. Okay, if I want to deal with the conflict, I need to make sure I keep relationships in addressing conflict. If I want my project to persist. Okay, we don't tell you do it that way. We don't give you the method. But in the book we do the methodology. So give the suggestion, the orientation, and not the prescription. And suggest a few methods how other people do it. But nobody can take this decision for you. So this is what I like about the patterns approach. There's a famous, you can't, Muster werden nicht erfunden, sie werden gefunden.
You don't invent patterns, you find them.
Yeah, in German it rhymes, it's very nice. So you can't invent a pattern, they are already there. So you find them. So what I like about this approach, it's grounded in reality and people's experiences. This is also what Elina Ostrom's work is grounded in, but based on other premises than ours.
Yeah.
But it's grounded in people's experience, in what really works. So it's not derived from, oh, I have an utopian idea of how the future should look like, and then, let me go back to this, when we came in, I saw a paper here, which says song, teamwork, responsibility, integrity, quality. Who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want this? Who wouldn't want solidarity, equity, fairness, human rights? But for me, it's like preaching. It's like what Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission, says. We need to defend our Western values. Yeah, look at how they defend them at the border. Right? So what we're doing here is not a values-based approach, and not a theoretical approach. We're looking at what works. And obviously we connect it to that idea of fairness, freedom, and aliveness, which is not only the freedom of the isolated individual, it's also enacting another idea of freedom. But that's another discussion. So I would like to at least do 2 examples with you. And this will still take a little bit of time, but are you still okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So, let's talk economy here. You were just asking me over lunch if there's some social power, so to speak, in the debate in Germany. And this is a good example to talk to this point, because the community-supported agriculture idea is 50 years old, more or less. It came from Japan, where it more or less covers, but with other methods than in Germany, 50% of provisioning with food, with basically with vegetables. And then it began in the US, where it is also different from Germany, and in Germany it began in the early 80s, with 3 farms. And then there were 3 farms for 10 years, and then there were 7 farms for another 10 years, and then there were 11 farms for another 5 years. And then it started growing, and now we have 10 new farms each month. It's really exciting. And what we also have is people looking at, why does this work? And they say, if this works in growing food, why shouldn't it work for manufacturing? Why shouldn't it work for, I don't know, producing means of transportation? Why shouldn't it work for other areas as well? And sometimes the interesting thing here is you don't build intentional communities. You do community-supported agriculture, which we call solidarische Landwirtschaft, solidarity agriculture in Germany, with people who for very, very, very different reasons and having very different values just want local biological food. But they don't, friends, they certainly don't belong to the same party. Right? And it was important for us not to include intentional communities here. Say, no, the Commons is not only about intentional communities, like we think alike, so we do something together thing, right? It's another way of provisioning, another way of governing, another way of living. So how do they do this? Do you see here people from the community contributing work because they want to learn? So it's not, there is still a division of labor, because you will have the farmer doing the bulk of the work. So what does the farmer do? At the beginning, which is usually in April, he says, for production this year and feeding 200 families, I need A, B, C, D, E. And there are usually 3 or 4 people working on the farm, really working on the farm, plus during the weekends other people helping them out, the peaks, for instance, etc. So what they do is, because sometimes the Commons is being portrayed as the economy without money, which is also true. But it's not the only truth, right? So, at the beginning of the year, which in Germany is, of the planting season, which in Germany is March, April. So the farmer says, I need A, B, C, D, E, say 1,000 euro. Well, 1,000 a month would it be? No, it would be more than 1,000 a month. Well, just to take it for the sake of example, right? So, and then you are the community. You are these people. And you would say, okay, I'm a student, I can contribute 10. I don't know, I have 5 kids and blah, 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 not enough money, I can contribute 5. And you say, okay, I can contribute 20 for whatever reason. And you say, I can contribute 28. And you go on. And you pool your money according not only to your needs, because this is the delivery part, but according to your capacities. And then they have a method for it. They call it beta window. So then at the end of this, you say, oh, it's not enough. So you do it again. So contribute again. And then people get their budgetable. It depends on which community-based supported agriculture it is. It might be once a week, it might be only during spring and summer and autumn, it might be throughout the year and only twice a week in winter, twice a month in winter, etc. So there are different schemes depending on the circumstances. And what is it then that everybody gets? You have contributed 10 and you 5 and you 20 and you 28. They get the same thing. So what we call this, you practice gentle reciprocity. That is, there is a connection between giving and taking, a connection of reciprocity. It is even possible in some community-supported agriculture that somebody doesn't contribute any money and only, for instance, work on knowledge, or I, for instance, I could kind of contribute like propaganda for community-supported agriculture, right? But usually there is a relationship of reciprocity, but it's a gentle way because it takes into account your different capacities. But you get the same message. So now we had a drought in 2018 in Germany. It was really awful. Like, it was really like it was the first time I've seen this. So no cucumbers. Or we have only 1 cucumber per month for each of you. So the question is, what is the price of this cucumber then? If you have, in a market economy, let's compare it to the market economy. What would happen? Drought, cucumber, price goes up, right? What happens in a community-supported agriculture? What's the price of the cucumber? Goes it up or down? Well, that was a weird question because it was misleading. Don't answer it. It was misleading you, teasing you. There's no price. There is no such thing as a price. Because you get your share of the produce, whatever that share is. It might be that you don't get cucumbers, but you won't have a situation where only he can afford a cucumber and she can't. So this is the equity enshrined in the governance. That's what I meant the other day. I said we don't start from the values, from the equity. The equity must be a built-in feature into the governance system. That is in our patterns, right? So have you ever heard an economist talking about an economy where the idea and category of price doesn't exist? I think that they can't even make sense of the idea. And it's interesting because they would say, and we know it from the CARE discussion, they would say, oh, then this is not the economy. They would define it out of the economy, the famous iceberg thing. So what I'm saying here that one of the patterns we just had, when you do this pooling thing, you share the risk of provisioning. You share the risk of provisioning. So drought, no cucumbers, no cucumber. And not cucumber for the rich man. That's the basic idea. In sharing the risk of provisioning, through that process, pooling your money, capping the produce, so each gets, you don't get all the cucumbers. Each gets the same share, but then what people do, they swap. The guy who doesn't like cucumber swaps it. And then you divide it up. So that is why in the solidarity economy, they don't call it commodity. So the notion of commodity disappears, which is logic because if you don't have a price, you don't have a commodity. Which is also logic because you don't have proprietarians who exchange their property. You don't have owners, sorry, who exchange their property. Selling that's the definition of buying and selling, right? The exchange of ownership. So, and you practice gentle reciprocity. So what I'm saying here is, you share the risk of reversioning and you change everything else. And you get rid of those categories who today are the core categories of, who said it? The liberal market capitalism. This is how you escape from neoliberal capitalism. So again, the question is not, we would like to do that in our book, it was how do we do it? How do we do it actually, really, on the ground? So this is just one example. I would like to do another one, because I'm keen to talk about property today, because I have never time to do that, and today I feel like that's the moment. Are you still okay? Are you still following me? Okay, so then I promise that's the last one, and then we can engage in discussion. So what I like about this example, there's a lot of things. So I guess I should say that we don't say in the examples we use in the book, we refer to 60 to 70 examples. We have looked at 15 more closely. And we don't say this is the perfect commons. We try to write a book where we explain this is how you can create yours. And here's orientation. We don't judge these projects. We are not part of them. We haven't lived through their conditions, etc., etc. But what I like about this one especially, not only it's old, it's huge. It's 18,000 plus their families, members plus their families in Brooklyn. And it exists for almost 50 years now. And it's at a distance of 3 miles from Wall Street. So like it's a very urban, neoliberal capitalist environment, right? And he would say, so how can they do something really disruptive, something really different in such an environment? What is it that they've done? Why did we pick it up as an example? And the Park Slope Food Court, since I run across them, and I've participated in a meeting, in one of their big meetings they have, it's like, I came home, I was like, why do we only have, in this case I would say, why don't people copy their property regime? Because I felt like it's ingenious. So what do? They provide food and basic items for everybody. So they basically withdraw a supermarket from the market. So in the German book we call the chapter Withdrawing a Supermarket from the Market. That's what they do. And you step into the supermarket they have, and you feel like, oh, that's a supermarket. That's the other thing of the commons. If you don't know how things are done, you can't see it. So you need to put your lens on, right? And then you can see it. So this is why I think that mapping is an important tool for the commons. We need to map the commons. And so you go in there, and then you're like, okay, a lot of products. There's a price tag on. So that's very different from the solidarity economy. So you have the price. You have cashiers. And then you interview people at the cashier. So provide you I'm a teacher, I'm a cultural worker, I'm a medicine. And you realize that the people themselves basically sell to themselves. But this is just at a symbolic level. This is just what you see. So how is it connected to the property model? They have in their constitution and their governance rules. I don't know in South Africa, how would you set up a cooperative? How would you become a member of a cooperative legally? We discussed it the other day, but the answer was not clear for me. So in Germany we have this Genossenschaften, right? And you contribute a share. So you basically give money and get the right to vote. Which in a way is a transactional thing. Yeah, money, right to vote. So what is different and more democratic in a Genossenschaft is you can give 100, you can give 500, but you still get only one vote. So your votes count the same. One person, one vote, which is more democratic than more money, more vote, right? Okay, fine. You do the same thing here, but you still can't vote. So you pay your share, which is pretty low, kind of your entrance fee to the collective, but you're not entitled to vote. And why is that? Because they say, hey, we connect it to something else. Because what is the most expensive thing when we buy food in the supermarket? I mean, why is it that we complain that farmers don't get enough money for their produce, and at the same time we complain that the produce in the supermarket are expensive? Because there's a whole chain in between. There are shares, and there's a profit-making process in between, etc., etc. And there's no shared risk of provisioning, etc., among all those who participate in that chain, right? Okay, so what they did is, so we have a whole chain there of people who want to make money out of that distribution chain, so we need to change that. The best way to change that is, in their case, try to minimize the amount of paid labor. The number of people who are being paid for being part of that distribution chain. And what they do is, they have in their rules the 2 hours 47 minutes. 2 hours 47 minutes participation in any activity of the cooperative. So for instance, you go into the supermarket and in the second store you have the daycare for children. So that people can really go shopping and leave their children there, and you can invest your 2 hours 47 minutes taking care of all the other members of the community, for instance. Or you do the paperwork because you like the paperwork. Or you work at the cashier, or you clean the floors, or whatever you do. So you're part of a group which is assigned to a certain working slot, and you need to do this working slot. And the thing is, it's non-commensurable. So you cannot trade your working slot. You cannot say, you know, I really don't have time today, and my cousin needs $20, so I send him to do the job and I pay him $20. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. And why is it? So I think that the thing that the working slots are not tradable is important, because it basically obliges you to reenact your relationship with that project and that process and that community at least once a month for 2 hours and 47 minutes. And if you hear the founders speaking about Parkslow Food Corp, they say that is the secret of it. So the property model only entitles you to be a full member and to go shopping there where the prices are, again, 30% lower than outside, if you do both. And they call it member ownership. And you only become a member if you do both. You contribute your financial share and you work regularly in your working slots. So they link decommodified work and honoring care to the property regime. And this is kind of different from, let's set up a collective property, you see? Because their basic question was, in setting up the property regime, is how can we enact and deepen relationship through our property regime? And when looking at this example and other examples, we found kind of really puzzling in terms of why does their property regime look so complicated? You end up with that same thing. Because these people thought through how can we create property regimes that help us to deepen the relationships we are in anyway. With future generations, with the earth, with other people, and finally with ourselves. Because let me close with this. Commoning changed everything. So it emancipates ourselves from the market and state, but it also transforms ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.